I'm also very proud to introduce our closing keynote, a person of incredible intelligence and a gift, Susan Patrick, the CEO and president of iNACOL, the International Association of K-12 Online Learning. They're the leading voice for the emerging field of online and blended learning. iNACOL both educates and advocates to build online and blended learning's capacity and quality, publishing national standards and spearheading initiatives such as their most recent publication, Measuring Quality from Inputs to Outputs. Their annual conference, the Virtual School Symposium, is the standard we measure our conference by. Susan is a former director of the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education. She holds master's degrees from USC Annenberg School for Communication, and she was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Colorado College in 2011. We are honored to have Susan as our closing keynote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah? Got it? Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor to be in California again. I travel every week. Last year I only didn't travel 2 weeks, and I'm traveling all over the country and all over the world. And if Hall's presentation didn't show us the rate of change, the rapid rate of change in education, in the world, in the economy, we're at a really critical time in our country for thinking about how to do things differently so our kids can be prepared. And as I'm traveling across the U.S., been to 48 of the 50 states, and I'm spending a lot of time with ministries of education around the world as they're trying to imagine what the future of education looks like. And I'll tell you, other countries, when they make a decision to move, can move much faster than we can in the US. This is just a reality out there. So I know that back when I ran a distance learning campus at a university, I was very involved day to day with our students, with our faculty members, and it was hard to get a sense of what was happening in other institutions and other states, much less around the world. So I'm here to provide both a national perspective and an international perspective on the change that is driving the future of education and what those trends look like, and hopefully offer some hope and solutions. So I feel so lucky to work with iNACOL. When I left the federal government back in 2005, out of all of the areas of education and technology that I had seen as I traveled, the one thing that was driving the most transformative change for kids, for student-centered learning, was what was happening in online learning, and now increasingly in blended learning. I mean, the push towards blended just in the last 3 years has been tremendous. In large part, California has had many examples of some of the leading blended learning programs, which is interesting. So I have a question for everybody in the audience. How many of you right now have implemented online learning programs in your schools, in your districts? So that's pretty good. How many of you have implemented blended learning programs in your schools and your districts? How many of you have competency-based education programs in your schools? So where are you from?
North Lake Tahoe.
North Lake Tahoe and Brandon University. Okay, and Science Tech High School. Great, terrific. How many of you consider that you have student-centered, personalized learning programs in your schools, right? All of the above from the ones that just raised your hands. So I feel really lucky to be at this nonprofit organization, which for some reason that new learning models is popping up at the top too. We have 4,400 members, from people from universities that are researching what's happening in K through 12 online and blended learning, people from school districts, people from charter schools, people from universities that are actually running programs. I call us the Switzerland of online learning because we're the big tent and we're really trying to build capacity in the field. Our number one job is to work on policy advocacy. I spend all of my time in state capitals, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done in Sacramento to get all of you the kinds of flexibility that you need to truly create these student-centered environments. And so I'm going to try to weave in the connections between practice and policy because they're hugely important. The second main thing we focus on are quality standards. And I can't thank Brian Bridges and Mike Lawrence and the folks here. eLearn has done an amazing job on the national quality standards for online courses. And also the work that's been happening at Q and at eLearn and building capacity across. You've got some national leaders here in California, and it's awesome that they're putting together this conference to help connect all of you with the kinds of challenges and opportunities and solutions that are out there. The third area that we focus on in our nonprofit is new learning models. We're partners with the Gates Foundation, EDUCAUSE, CCSSO on a grant program called the Next Generation Learning Challenges. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those new learning models and those frameworks of where we see the future going there. 3 or 5 years ago, there were about 5 proof points in blended learning that everybody talked about all the time. We just finished the last funding round of 20 new models that are mastery-based, competency-based, blended, student-centered, and sustainable. They're doing research right now on those models to look at the business models and the financials and make those available to people so people can see how to make the shift in a sustainable way. So let me go ahead and get started. Our members, as I said, are diverse. We have over 3,000 educator members, teachers on the ground doing online and blended learning, competency-based learning. Those teachers are the lifeblood of everything. There is nothing more important than the role of teachers in these new learning models, and what they're able to do with kids is truly amazing. If you think about what Hall was mentioning on that 2 Sigma with the blooms, if you can work one-on-one, right? If students can work one-on-one and they can be in a mastery-based, highly personalized environment, you can have double the effect. And so why are we still teaching with a single teacher in a single textbook, hard copy textbook, in a 1 to whatever ratio when we can redesign our learning environments around the kids? Then you can start to create, using advanced technologies, using people differently, you can start to create student-centered learning models that mimic that student-centered design. So let me shift to the international perspective. The World Future Society is this group of futurists that the data set is based at George Washington University. They collect trends data from researchers all around the world. Their data has been accurate 97% of the time, plus or minus 3 years. It's the most accurate set of forecast data out there. And on this list of trends, the top 10 breakthroughs that will change life on the planet globally over the next 20 to 30 years is pretty obvious. Number 1, alternative energy is huge. Number 2, the desalination of water. When I was over in China, they're going to run out of water in the Yalu River in the next 20 years, and that's going to cause major population shifts if they don't figure out how to desalinate water. Same thing across the Middle East. When I was in Jordan, they're going to run out of water in the next 20 years. They're huge issues. Biometrics, nanotechnology. The only item that relates to education up here is virtual education and distance learning. And this means that the best teachers and the very best internationally benchmarked content can be brought to students in third world countries and first world countries. The very best world-class education has the ability to connect with populations and kids globally, and we're starting to see this happen. It is fundamentally going to change what kids have access to what quality education. In the EU, they've developed this EU-wide e-learning action plan. They have built competencies from pre-K through K through 12 through college and career readiness. So the whole competency map And kids can go and learn, or adults can go and learn, and those competencies are mapped out over their entire life. Many of you are familiar with the International Baccalaureate Program. They, in 2006, got foundation funding to create the IB diploma program online. They've trained their master teachers to teach online. They use world-class content, the same high standards, the same kind of rigor and inquiry where they require at least fluency in at least 2 languages. When they started with 26 countries. They are now in 125 different countries. So imagine this, there are students taking the IB program that can network, connect, and collaborate with other students in other countries globally, right? So how many of you have your students, no matter where they live, have access to an IB program? No matter where they live and no matter what school they're in. Any zip code, any school district could have access to the IB program because they offer it online. And so when I'm going around the country, when I'm going into rural areas, when I'm going into urban areas, when I'm going into suburban areas where about 30 kids in a 1,200 student school might have access to IB, you could say every student could have access. The other interesting thing here is the UK. England is really looking as a world-class education, as an export opportunity. 29 billion pounds annually in e-learning exports to China. Education is no longer a cottage industry in the world. This is changing. This makes people uncomfortable. It is absolutely true. India is looking at exporting education in EduComp. They have, EduComp has digitized internationally benchmarked, world-class standards, and digitize that content, and they are reaching students not only in India, but around the world. In Turkey, we've been involved with 9 of the Arab Gulf states in a new online learning project. And you know what the goal is, the driver? To give girls education that have never had education in those countries. And the ministries are serious about this. It's amazing, and they are opening up this access. In Turkey, back in 2006, they had no students taking online courses. 2 years into the program, it started as a STEM initiative where they worked with businesses to help build world-class science, technology, engineering, and math courses. In 2 years in Turkey, they had 6 million kids accessing these courses. In 3 years, they had 15 million kids in Turkey accessing these online courses. How many online learning enrollments in K through 12 education do we have in the US, according to the US Department of Education in 2011? About 2 million, 1.8 million enrollments. These other countries have the ability to scale because in each of our 50 states, we have policies that may limit growth. University of California used to have the UCCP, college prep, right, with the online courses out of the University of Santa Cruz. When the UC system doesn't get the appropriation, what happens to that program? Goes away. We used to have, last year, if I had been giving this talk at the same time, I would have said we have 32 state virtual schools in the US offering individual online courses to kids. The number is 28 this year. Why? Because Kentucky and Nebraska, they didn't get the appropriations for those programs. So all of a sudden, all of those kids in those zip codes that don't have access to the courses can't get them. What is the percentage of high schools in California? Percentage of high schools where kids do not have access to the full A to G requirements to get into the UC system. What's that number? 40%. 40% of high schools don't offer the full A to G requirements to get into the public university system. It just drives me crazy because like we could fix this problem tomorrow. We could flip a switch and give those kids access. And you know where those kids are that don't have access? They're in low-income communities. They're kids of color. This is not right. This is not right. When I was in the EU at these meetings and talking to folks from Finland and around the world, I said, what do you see when you look at the data from the OECD? What do you see when you look at the US? And you know what they said to me? So the data makes it really clear. The US has the highest tolerance for inequality of any nation, of any of the developed nations. That's what the data shows. It's unbelievable. So what gets me going about online and blended learning, we have a way now to give every child access to a world-class education. We have a way in our schools to create blended learning environments that are highly personalized, that are competency-based, so kids can move at their own pace and get extra help when they want to, and collaborate and follow their interests and demonstrate that knowledge in all different ways. We have the ability to do that. So why are we still doing the batch system, one teacher to a single textbook with a group of kids in rows? It's totally, what? Insane. It's totally insane. And so when you look at what some of these other countries are doing, okay, let's go back to India. This is Shantanu Prakash, who's the head of EduComp, who I was actually in a conference in LA in 2006 on a panel with him. And he said, we have a goal at EduComp. It's a public-private partnership with the Ministry of Education in India, and they've asked us to digitize world-class academic standards, digitize the curriculum, and we see that as an opportunity to reach lots of kids around India. We have a goal of universal access to K-12 education in India in the next 10 years. That's unbelievable. In order to do that, they would have to build 200,000 new schools. They're not going to be able to do that. They can't afford to do that. And they have a shortage of high-quality prepared teachers. So what are they going to do? They're taking that digital curriculum, world-class digital curriculum, they're taking their best teachers and giving them the tools and the skills to teach online, to teach at a distance. So we were at a conference at Harvard this summer, and we were on another panel together, and I said, so I remember back in 2006 when you said you were starting this project, how many students are you reaching? 12 million. And they're just getting started. So the ability for these other countries to ramp up and scale programs is amazing. So the other thing that was going on in India in 2006 is the government announced a research competition for universities to create a $10 tablet. And they're at price point of $35 right now. And they've already distributed these to 10 million students in underserved areas that don't have access to education. And they can't keep enough of them coming off the presses. It's an Android platform, works very much like any of the tablets, iPads that you've seen, and the $35 basic touchscreen tablet has all of that digital content and tools. This is being deployed across India right now. Hong Kong, really interesting. They've been doing blended learning. But what drove them to start doing this, to move away from textbooks to digital learning, was in 2003, the SARS outbreak. They said, this doesn't make sense. Kids are coming together, they're sick, they're having to stay home. How do we ensure anytime, everywhere learning? So they started building the capacity for teachers to use blended learning, online learning tools, anytime, any place. And so what happened when the H1N1 virus, came across the US, right? Schools shut down for a minimum of 5 days if there was somebody who got sick, right? What happened in Hong Kong and in Singapore, right? The kids that were sick stayed home and the learning continued. They had continuity of learning plans in place. They have training all of their teachers in the pre-service colleges of education to teach online, to use blended learning, to use digital content, to do that personalized learning strategies. And guess what? They can use them every day in the classroom to help kids too. So other countries are thinking ahead and they're bringing these things in now. South Korea has a national virtual school. They are moving from a switch fully to digital, the digital transition away from textbooks. And China, 1.3 billion people, back in 2004 and 5, were working on digitizing the entire K-12 content and curriculum. We did an international survey in '06 and then again last year. China's goal is to reach 100 million more students that are not being served using online learning in the next 10 years. So I think people were surprised when they saw the Olympics going on, and like this force for competition and global excellence and being number one, they are employing the strategies that will scale and get their kids ready for the global economy and ready to go. And their central strategy is around e-learning. So this is from the World Bank. They have this publication, The Futurist. China may be the first country to succeed in educating most of its population through the internet in the next 20 years. So the investments from '03 to '07, China spent about $1 billion to implement online learning projects in the rural countryside. It's amazing when you go over there and you're talking to folks about what they're doing. And it's not just digitizing the same old way. These students at this middle school in Beijing were one of the first ones to start implementing online learning 5 years ago. And they are reaching tens and thousands of students today. But at the same time, they're saying, how do we make sure our students are creative? This is a knowledge-based economy where design matters, where innovating matters. And so teachers are being trained to teach students how to challenge their history textbooks, and they're being graded on the quality of their arguments. And they're saying that internet's giving Chinese children wings to do the inquiry, wings to do the research. So things are changing internationally in terms of education. Singapore is probably furthest ahead. 100% of their secondary schools use blended online learning. So every student has a tablet. In their lockers, they have plugs. They've digitized the curriculum. They're training all of their teachers to teach online. So when I get on an airplane and I go overseas to these different meetings, and then I fly back, and then I read the kinds of debates that we're having in education in this country, it really scares me for our kids. It's crazy the kinds of debates that we're in right now. I'll just give you one example. So Chugach, Alaska is a small rural district up in Alaska. In 1994, they moved to an entire competency-based model. They had terrible graduation rates. The kids were not successful. They had graduated, like in the last 10 years, 2 kids went to college. I mean, it was just, they were not being successful, so they said, we have to start over. So they went to a standards-based, competency-based. Kids can use their interests to figure out how they want to learn, their clear learning goals, how they want to demonstrate those things. And when they made the transition with their teachers, after 3 years of implementing this, and all of a sudden down to the standard level, how the student demonstrated, the level of proficiency, they had all of this data that could roll up. Teachers went to the administrators and said, our old evaluation system is so broken. You now have the data on how we're working with kids and how they're doing. Will you judge us based on performance? This is amazing. But it's because they had a competency-based system and they understood like who was working with who and how that rolled up, and it became a continuous improvement process. The fact that we're having this debate on teacher effectiveness with a single year, time-based, age-based, grade-based assessment system that was in the box of, I will get into this in policy, but this is like totally upside down. It's totally backwards unless you have a learning-based system where you're looking at individual student growth trajectories. And Rob Darrow, who works with me in iNACOL, we went to go visit one of our Next Generation Learning Challenges grantees, USC Hybrid High. It's downtown in LA in the World Trade Center building. They have 125 kids from surrounding zip codes. It's 70% Latino, about 28% African American. And here's a hallmark of a competency-based environment. When the kids come in, it's like dipping your toe in the stream. They say, where are you coming in? So they do the adaptive math assessments, the NWEA math assessments. a math. So kids coming into 9th grade were across 8 different grade levels. And we all nod, like that's what's going on in our schools, right? Whether it's an urban environment or any environment, this is what's going on. How is a teacher supposed to handle all of that, right? And if you're getting measured on age and grade base, if you do an amazing job and you bring a kid up from a 6th grade level to an 8th grade level and they're in 9th grade, you're doing amazing things. Do you get any credit for that right now with our accountability system? It's so backwards. So let me go into the national perspective. I'm going to start with online learning. I talked about all that growth and the access. What are the drivers for online learning? To give kids courses they otherwise have no access to give kids teachers they otherwise don't have access to. But the access is very uneven across the US depending on what state you're in. And these are just state virtual schools, but you see in Florida, the Florida Virtual School is the largest state virtual school in the country. They have over 300,000 enrollments. Idaho, which is, you know, a neighbor over on the West Coast, they for their number of students and the number of people that they have in Idaho, have pretty good penetration in terms of access. They're very rural, but it's like 1 in 4 students is taking an online course. So that's a pretty high percentage of the population of K through 12 students. What this tells you in those 28 different state virtual schools, the policies and the funding models are directly tied to how many kids can have access to these courses. And so if you look at California, there's no longer a state virtual school. Many of you are providing this to the kids in your district and maybe even the contiguous districts because that's what the policy says you're allowed to do. But if there's a student in a district that doesn't have access, they simply have no access and we can make that available. So what's the US data? 55%, more than half of all public school districts are offering online classes. A lot of those are in places that are getting them from their state virtual school. And in the districts, it's about 2 million enrollments now, mostly in high school, smaller numbers in middle and elementary school. But what's interesting is the primary provider are universities and colleges, and a lot of people don't realize this. And it's about providing opportunities for all students. So those of you with online programs, you're serving kids that are behind and need to recover credits. You're serving kids that are advanced and gifted and want to move ahead and need additional courses or additional AP courses. You're serving kids that are homebound. All kinds of reasons. If I were to bring in a group of 50 kids right now and ask each of them why they're in an online class, you may have 50 different answers. And to me, that's good. It's about serving kids' unique needs, why they need it, why they want to take them, making those opportunities available. So if you ask the kids what the benefits of taking an online course are, the number one thing that they love is the flexibility of working at their own pace. And that can tell us a lot about how we might think about designing new models in our classrooms too. If we know one thing about kids is that everybody learns differently and may not learn at the same rate. So let's figure out how to organize instruction and learning around that flexible pacing. When I'm talking, those of you that are new to online and blended learning, when I'm talking to policymakers that have no exposure to this, when I am talking to school board members, parents, even foundations that fund a lot of work in education, everybody has this different interpretation of what online learning is and isn't. It's not just sticking software on a computer in front of a kid. That is not it. So I tried to design this diagram to say online learning is this adapted TPAC model, TPAC. It's the technology, it's the internet access, the broadband access, it's the technology platform, it's the devices, could be mobile, could be laptops. The technology systems, the learning management systems, the content management systems, then they start to say, okay, there's a lot more involved there. P is the people. That is the most important part of any online or blended learning program. It's your teachers, it's the professional development they need, it's the shift in pedagogy, it's the administrators and the principals that have to manage these programs and evaluate them. The A is the assessment, and we need to start thinking about systems, plural, of assessments and how we look at education. It can be adaptive assessment on the way in to see where the gaps are and where we need to fill those gaps. It can be embedded assessments that are invisible to the student but provide that formative data all of the time. Performance-based assessments are the most, internationally, they are talking about performance-based assessments. Projects, essays, writing. How does a student demonstrate that they know those learning objectives? And I hope that this country starts investing in performance-based assessments. We've got the 2 assessment consortia right now, right, nationally. We're going to be implementing very different assessments across the country in 2014. And I'll give anybody access to any of these slides I'm happy to make these available. But the notion of adaptive assessments to see the gaps, formative assessments to get that data back every day. When we were at USC Hybrid High, those kids have their data snapshot every single day along the trajectory of where they're going that has a personalized learning plan. This is the kind of data they need. They're doing performance-based assessments to set up in their portfolios to see examples of the work. And then the idea of summative assessments. The idea of summative assessments, why they have to be at the end of the year at a single point in time on a single age when kids could move faster or kids need to take more time when they're coming in further behind. So we're trying to push the idea of multiple assessments at multiple points in time, and that also means that the summative assessments, important to validate the data on the ground, could be broken up and made more modular and offered throughout the year. Here's my point of encouragement on this. Right now, there is a ESEA waiver, No Child Left Behind waiver, that Maine and New Hampshire have in to Arne Duncan. And he has said that he is willing to consider this. It would be the first true competency-based accountability model, allowing summative assessments to be broken up in that way and offered literally every day. So when a kid moves in and they're ready to take that part of the assessment, if that happens, I hope it will be game-changing because we're in the period where No Child Left Behind is going to be reauthorized in the next, probably not 12 months, but probably 24 months. And if we have a thoughtful, rational, student-centered summative assessment model in 2 states, even though Maine and New Hampshire are small, the example of how you can actually do that. And I don't understand how we're going to implement these new Smarter Balance and Park assessments in 2014 that are online all at the same time in a single day without shutting down all of our networks in our schools. So they're going to have to be thinking about this differently. So T for the tech, P for the people, A for the assessment, and the C is for the content, online content and curriculum. So that can be adaptive content, it can be all of the applications and types of content that you saw from Hall and others. The student is at the center of the design. Wrapped around that is the leadership and the management and the administration of programs, and wrapped around that is a policy and what you can do. And in California and in most states, and our #1 policy issue at iNACOL is this ADA seat time problem that we have. This is totally insane, right? We're measuring the wrong end of the kid. When you look at other countries and they ask me what our #1 policy issue in K-12 education is in the US, and I tell them seat time, their jaws drop. They're like, you must be kidding. They fund per pupil, and they have competency-based models. States are so afraid of moving away from seat time to what if you fund per pupil? It would be like having 100% ADA, right? Other countries fund 100% per pupil. So we're working on a new project that we just launched with funding from the Gates Foundation to actually do some of these comparisons and how this might work. Now, even imagine this. If you really were looking at individual student growth trajectories and even doing accountability from getting data from the ground up, and you have kids that come into ninth grade at 8 different grade levels and a number of levels in between those 8 different grade levels, right? And you're able, with the most challenged kids, the kids that have no support at home, the kids that are really, really struggling, are in dangerous neighborhoods, and you're able to bring that kid up 1.5 grade levels or even 2 grade levels. What if you got an incentive, right? What if your schools got rewarded for doing the most with the most challenged kids, as opposed to the way that we do this today, right? There are things that we can do that are really important. And these new models, what excites me about them, it's not about technology, it's no silver bullet. Without the technology, you can't totally change into a student-centered environment. It is very, very difficult for teachers to manage that. This makes it possible for teachers to have the information, the data on where every kid is, and then provide those, start to reorganize, provide those wraparound services. And it's not just the academic, it's the social, emotional pieces too. So when I'm talking about competency education, which I'll talk a little bit more about, you see this whole child focus, but it's cool. With this, technology, people, new assessment models, new content models, and all of that, this is what we mean when we're talking about new models with online and blended learning. And so I don't want to bore you with definitions. We did this big definitions project that was supposed to take 6 months, and it took 2 years with the help of Columbia University's leading researchers and grad students in this area, and we sent it out to the field together. Just let you know, we have a whole definitions project that as you're working with people that don't have exposure to these ideas, the definitions can be helpful, and with policymakers too. So this is from Michael Horn at Insight. He's based up in the Silicon Valley area. So blended learning is a combination of face-to-face and using online. That's pretty straightforward. What was interesting when we were at USC Hybrid High, that David Dwyer, who used to be with Apple and then with Apex and has gone to do this, said, we intentionally call it hybrid because it's a combination of the academic and the social emotional with the students that we're working with. And I thought that was pretty cool. I hadn't heard that before. But like these new models are not just about using online technology in a face-to-face, but they're about a redesign of the instructional model to be student-centered. Fundamentally, that's the most important thing. And like, we want to change the name of our conference from the iNACOL Virtual School Symposium. We get over 2,000 people who all are doing this across the US, and the level of energy there is amazing. It is like, we thought we were all alone in our district. We're the outliers out there. And then a week ago, because we just had our conference in October, somebody told one of the people on our team, like, oh, in our school we hate it when people go to your conference. I'm like, why? Because they come back and they're all fired up and they're like, no, we can do things differently, and they bring in these changes and they make it more student-centered. They're the people doing the work. But this is the key. Blended learning, and this comes from Educa's study back in 2004. They've been doing this for a while in different higher ed environments. Blended learning should not just be online and face-to-face, but rather a fundamental redesign of the instructional model that is more student-centered, that increases the interaction from student to student, from student to teacher, from student to content resources, and even students to outside experts. And the high-quality models are doing this. One of the things that I get a little frustrated with in the field is that we have this like, it's a very important study of the rise of blended models, but they kind of break them into just 4 models. A rotation model, where you're like moving into a computer lab and then out, is so limiting. There's much more of a continuum to the shift of can every kid move at their own pace and how student-centered is it, that I think is much more important. So I show this picture. This is from a school in Minnesota, from Education Evolving, of a blended learning environment. And what you can't see are the tables around the rooms where kids are in small groups doing project-based learning. They'll do several projects that will last over the course of a semester that will build in from all different, their interests, different courses. They'll be interdisciplinary. But what does this look like? Yeah, who's been to Google? Has anybody been to Google? What do the modern workplace look like where people work together in groups, where people work independently? Those kids have things that are interesting to them, around them. So this is about individualized, personalized learning. Voice Academy, which is Chicago Public Schools, not a charter school, a high school that was one of the very first blended models. And we worked with them because they looked all over the country and they said, where's the professional development for the instructional shift to highly personalized blended learning? And guess what? It's hard to find, right? So what have you learned here at this conference? Leading edge certification, Q. I'm telling you, the work that Q has been doing, and the shift not just from the leading edge certification to look at online teaching, but taking those skills in online teaching and helping with the PD. I think in the future, the plan is to help with the blended too. There's a huge need to build capacity out there in the field because the blended models require all of those tools in the T, and the C, the content, but also all of the other wraparound support services too. So real quick, Voice Academy started 4 years ago. They just had their first graduating class in June. That neighborhood of Austin and the west side of Chicago had that school had an 8% graduation rate, 8 before. And they went in, and every kid has a laptop that they use only at the school. They can't leave the school with it because of safety issues. These students came in, they did adaptive assessments when they came in. They found they were all over the map. The majority of the students were at about a 3rd or 4th grade reading level in the 9th grade. And really all over the map in terms of math. And something like 30% special needs on different areas. Right, like just the numbers are off the charts. And so they brought in an interdisciplinary approach with blended learning where they gave the teachers the tools to highly personalize learning and allow kids to move at their own pace. But they brought in at first 1 RTI specialist, and now they have 3 RTI specialists. Response to intervention, they have a special ed teacher, and they have a reading specialist. And they all do this within the same public school budget, but they're just rearranging how they do their instructional model, their faculty, their people to support the kids. So Voice Academy, of the 120 students that started, had a 88% graduation rate with all of them going to college. All of them going to college. And I was there, and it was really intense. And one of the students there, his name is Aaron, spoke on we have a student panel with 9 people at our conference, spoke on our panel, and he was telling everybody how he never would have had the success unless he could have gone into this highly personalized model where he found out how far behind he really was, and he moved up, and it just motivated him to take ownership. And out of 25,000 applicants for the Gates Millennial Scholarship that pays all of your costs and all of your tuition for 4 years up to $180,000, he was one of the 1,000 winners of that comprehensive scholarship. And he said, I'm the first person in my community to go to college. Well, it's like, this is what's possible. This is why we get up, right? This is why we spend all this time in state capitals like Sacramento, because really you don't want to go there. and Des Moines and Topeka, where all these policymakers are going, everything's fine, let's argue about, the stuff of a old factory model. And like, no, let's design the environments to take our kids as fast and as far as they can go. So I love this quote. It's from the National Education Association. And they just put out a statement of support around blended learning, which is really encouraging. Online education can fundamentally change the relationship that students, teachers, parents, and the community have with their educational institutions and one another. For policymakers, those transformations pose some difficult choices. If they ignore online education, they turn their back on their responsibility to extend learning opportunities. And so too often we say this is black and this is white and there's no gray area. I'm all about let's focus on the kids. Our organization is all about being student-centered. Let's bring everybody under the tent and let's figure out what we can do to make this happen. And it can be done. It can be done because our 4,400 members are doing it and counting. And our 2,200 people that show up at our annual conference, they're doing it. So I believe. There is, and this is the way, this has been really helpful on the competency-based research that I've been doing. My colleague, Chris Sturgis, comes from a background of working with overage, undercredited youth. And she goes, there is a lot, people don't understand this online learning. She says, I didn't understand it, but you know that it's growing, and it's important to know that it is growing, and it's a trend, and it's really unstoppable, whether people like it or not. This is going to happen because it's the internet, and the internet is not going away, and online learning is learning, and online is just a delivery model. We have to ensure the quality that happens in that delivery model is of the top quality, and that we have great teachers, and that we have kids demonstrating their learning. But she said the way I really think that you should process this and think about it is that you have all of this pent-up demand from kids that want different ways of learning. And if they're going into a single classroom with a single teacher and a single textbook, you're not meeting that pent-up demand that they have for different kinds of services. So we need to start thinking not about school, but as different schools, different services, different people can do different things to help serve kids. And then it's really about getting kids the services they need for what they need for learning. And that's a pretty cool way of thinking about it. And if we can start to think about it, and this is why the debate over funding on seat time locks in all of these things in our boxes. I mean, if you think about the way most schools look, not all schools, but most schools look, it's like an egg carton, right? 12 little spots, a single teacher with a single textbook, all in there. And that's just not the way the rest of the world works or operates. So how do we think about building the services and the learning environments, mapping out those competencies, and helping kids figure out what they can do to meet those learning goals and to show that they have learned, and give kids credit for learning formally or informally. This is a huge push in Europe too, and in other parts of the world. They are bridging the gaps between formal and informal learning in a way that we're barely just getting to. So this slide is just showing that we have these national standards for quality, and again, shout out to eLearning for all of their incredible work on the online course quality. Huge. And now I've talked a little bit about the trends, and I'll kind of wrap this all together. So the future trends, online and blended learning. Blended learning is really where the future is. There will always be a need for online or fully online for those kids that's the right fit, but that's a very small number. So if kids can't access courses, you're still going to have that driver for online learning. But the blended learning is very much, 47% of people that come to our conference are from school districts that want to start new blended programs. So that's pretty exciting. Competency-based approaches are really becoming very important. And this is in the context of the Common Core, too. So if you have the Common Core, with these goals in English language art and in math, and all of a sudden you can start thinking about how to organize the learning around these trajectories in a different way, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Mobile learning is taking off all over the world, and again, this is any time, any place. Another place where seat time does not fit at all. And then open resources and open educational resources. UNESCO in Paris had this Paris Declaration of a number of countries that are making curriculum, PD, learning materials open. And so I'll say this, as you are implementing the Common Core and begin to implement the Common Core, and I'm saying this to state departments of ed, people in districts and schools, you can use and buy any third-party resources that fit the curriculum. But if you yourselves are creating PD or documents or resources around the Common Core, if you're using taxpayer dollars to create some learning materials, please make those open so you can share them across schools and share them with each other and adapt them and make them better and improve upon them. So again, there's a lot of excellent third-party content like Discoveries and a lot of other folks in this room that they've got instructional designers and researchers. But if you're developing your own materials or your own PD and others, please make those open so we can start to share them, because guess what? You can share them across schools, districts, and even states can start to build and collaborate. And so what are some national initiatives that are going on right now that matter for all of this that we've been talking about? The Council of Chief State School Officers, which is the superintendent of instruction, the state chief of education, started 4 years ago creating this partnership for next generation learning. They started an innovation lab network. Who's heard of this? Has anybody heard of this? So the Innovation Lab Network started with 6 states that the states had to apply and then have at least one. Wisconsin has like 20 districts involved who sign up for, the states say that they will open up policies, and the districts say they will start creating new next generation learning models. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because it's just gone from 6 states to 11. And guess what the most recent state to join is? You're not going to believe this. California. Do you know what district in California is the? No. I'll give you a hint. It's a district that has been taken over for state turnaround. Inglewood. Inglewood. So this is really, really interesting because, one, it means that somebody in Sacramento has said that they're willing to open up and look at policies. And guess what the #1 policy in California we're looking at? Seat time. I believe, I have hope that they are able to open this up and create some flexibility, give districts some flexibility, start looking at this. But okay, let me go. I'll come back to this. This is huge though. Gates Foundation Next Generation Learning Challenges, I mentioned, there are going to be 20 new models in both the instructional models for mastery-based, performance-based, blended, as well as the financial models for those new schools are going to be made available in research. And I'm trying to work with the Gates Foundation to say, a number of these schools are building tools, toolkits, guides. Let's make them available as gifts to the field with the foundation funding that you've done. So there'll be more models and more guidance on how to do them. How many people are familiar with the shared learning infrastructure? Anyone? This is another Gates Foundation project, like $45 million. And it's really to build, if they're able to do this, they're going to build a layer basically in the cloud of IT that will help support competency-based models with connecting the content and the student information. So this is a huge problem, the IT systems, to support all of the things that I'm talking about. Our IT systems have mostly been designed around compliance for No Child Left Behind, right? Your student demographic elements and your end-of-year testing, not standards-based, competency-based models. Oh, we have a paper coming out on that. So I'm going to be wrapping up pretty quickly here. Biggest trend, most important trend, is a move away from a time-based system to a competency-based system. This is what the Innovation Lab Network states have signed up for, to open up flexibility in state policy to allow districts and schools to do these things. World-class knowledge and skills, which in most states means the Common Core plus, planning for personalized learning, building in student voice and student agency so students can follow their interests and passions in the learning, comprehensive systems of support. We just released a paper on the art and science of designing competencies, and we're getting ready to release another paper around what student supports look like in a true competency-based environment. Number 5, this is what CCSSO calls performance-based learning, which is the same, lots of different terms are used. Proficiency-based, standards-based learning, competency-based. I don't care what term is used, just know that we use those terms interchangeably. Performance-based learning, and then anytime, everywhere learning. So if California is indeed signed up to make this possible for districts, they're going to have to open up some of their regulations. And that's exciting. Now, I've spent enough time in Sacramento to know that you don't know what will actually happen or not, so I don't mean to be like a downer on this, but they have actually signed up to take this on. So we will do everything in our power to work with those folks in the state capitol and the State Department of Ed to help them open it up and move away from seat time and figure out some funding formulas that get away from ADA to support you to do the kind of work that you need to do. This is from Oregon. Oregon was an early leader in opening up flexibility for schools and districts for competency education, and I love this. In a proficiency-based system, failure or poor performance, so you don't get that learning objective, is just part of a student's learning curve, but is not an outcome, because you cannot move on until you master something. So you can't get to 9th grade and have these huge gaps in your system in a true competency-based environment. What it looks like, every student starts off with a personalized learning plan or a map of all of the competencies and what they have already mastered. The data systems to support competency-based environments look very different. They provide student dashboards, teacher dashboards across those learning trajectories. There are rubrics, and this is one of the most amazing parts of when schools and districts go to true competency education and they get 10 4th grade math teachers together and say, here's the standard. How do you evaluate the standard? And the teachers all have different answers on the subject, right? This is what's different. Nobody talks about this for Finland, right? Finland is a competency-based system. Their teachers and their teacher prep programs are all working on those rubrics. And what does the highest level of proficiency look like? What does it look like when a student demonstrates that? If they don't get that, what do you have to do to get them there? This is what competency-based rubrics do. And adults are shifting roles. So there's a lot of personalization. There's grouping kids, moving them out, teacher specialization, educator specialization, like I talked about at Voice Academy. And that's really exciting. It's exciting for the professionals. It's exciting for the educators because they get to focus on things that are really digging down into the learning and not just classroom management or behavior. But you have different people that specialize in different areas. It can be in the classroom. Kids can be learning online. It can be expanded learning opportunities. It can be internships. It can be project-based learning, after school, museum, NASA. What matters is when the students in school that they're demonstrating that they've learned it. It doesn't really matter how they learn it. It can be a textbook. It can be a lecture. But it can be all of these other things. Individual growth models for accountability are key. Oh, we've got this emergence of 30 different states with waivers for No Child Left Behind right now. And we've got all of these growth models emerging. Guess what? Very few of the growth models are actual on individual student trajectories. They're still taking the end of year testing and then grouping kids together and saying that predictively, how is the school going to grow? And people are getting very confused. Well, I'm trying to push like Carnegie Foundation and Gates Foundation to say we have to look at individual student growth trajectories and then roll that data up to the school level and the district level and the state level to really understand what's happening with kids. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to do these projected growth cohorts, which are happening in a lot of states right now. So this is the idea behind learning progressions with differentiated trajectories. So if you have all of these standards that sort of build and scaffold along learning, so let's say this is, I'll just use Algebra 1, a set of lessons, a set of skills that kids need, and they could go, some of them can go out of order, right? You learn more like in a honeycomb. Important concepts with learning trajectories are this teaching differentiation, or kids want to learn in different ways, or kids facilitating the interaction between students, and that this is scalable. And you're going to think this slide is crazy, and the first time I saw it, I thought it was too, but Jason Zimba, who worked on the Common Core, designed this. And I was with the Gates Foundation, and they're like, this is the fundamental concept behind the next generation learning challenges. And I'm like, what on earth is this thing, right? This S-curve, imagine, is like a learning trajectory. Let's imagine this S-curve line is Algebra 1. And let's imagine that each of these little circles are different applications or different ways of learning. So they could be a textbook chapter for one of the concepts. They could be a bunch of the things that Hall just showed you. They could be a student doing a game-based segment. It could be a student having a conversation with a teacher. It could be a project-based assignment. So along that trajectory, it shouldn't matter how a student learns or what application they pick to learn. What will matter is how that student demonstrates that learning back at the high levels of proficiency. And so students could move through Algebra 1 doing these things. So the idea is, for the next generation learning challenges, new learning models, how do you design schools that work like this for kids? And that, to me, is pretty cool, right? It can be group projects and face-to-face and learning experiences. There's all this stuff down the left side, but it's basically those things are the principles in the research that we know about how kids learn and how you support high-quality learning. But the idea that you could make all of these different applications, ways of learning, and ways of expressing that learning available. So, fundamental to this, now we have this opportunity in the Common Core. So, these approaches encourage active, situated, experiential learning, and they should encourage engagement. And we want to focus on learning that is measured by mastery rather than seat time. So in wrapping up this idea around competency-based learning, it is fundamental to true personalization of learning at scale. And in doing this and implementing it, it challenges almost all of our assumptions about the current system. So for kids, it gives them the ability to build skills inside of school, outside of school, to advance and accelerate at their own pace, to get extra help in a number of different ways when they need it. The objectives are explicit and very transparent, and that the interventions are rapid exactly when a kid needs them. So just in providing resources, this is the new project that we have that's funded by the Nellie Mae Foundation and the Donald K. Foundation. It's called Competency Works. It's a website, and it's got blog posts. We're trying to amplify the voices in the field of the people that are doing it. So for those of you doing competency-based education here, we'd love to have you blog on lessons learned, reflections of the field. I'm blogging on kind of the policy work that's starting to emerge and things that I'm seeing in other countries. I'll be blogging about the visit to USC Hybrid High. So we're trying to amplify the work that's happening and give people a place to connect. And then this wiki has a tremendous amount of resources. And we're doing this with the National Governors Association, Jobs for the Future, and other organizations, which is really exciting because the governors have a true willingness to want to move to competency-based environments away from seat time too. I think they're making those connections between education and economic development, and they're seeing it firsthand in their states. So we're working on accountability and all of those policies, how you actually replace the Carnegie unit and redefine it with a set of competencies, not time. Things like assessments, pulling the policy towards where the practice can go. What you do with higher education, transcripts, and GPA when you move to a true competency. So these are tough issues, but they are being solved in many places right now. So our policy framework is to drive policy around student learning, guard high academic standards, expand student options, create the shared vision, offer districts and schools the flexibility, and have them commit to continuous improvement. And we're seeing that. We're really seeing that happen. So not to beat a dead horse, but seat time versus competency-based policies, equity. This is really, to me, a civil rights issue for giving every child access to what they need. Systems of assessments, I talked about. This is huge. We've got to get ourselves out of the single assessment box that we're in. It's not assessment. There are systems of assessments that help provide a lot of information about learning as the process moves on. We have to look at accountability differently from the ground up. We've been very focused on school accountability, but if we want to focus on student learning, that accountability has to start from the student learning trajectories, and we have to have the information at the student level and information systems to support this. So we'll work on federal and state accountability. New Hampshire and Maine are leading the way, and hopefully they'll get that federal policy waiver that will give us a competency-based accountability model that's truly student-centered. Oregon has done a lot of work on enabling policy. Ohio offers districts credit flexibility. And then you have now 11 states in the CCSSO Innovation Lab Network, which is really, to think that you have 11 states, and I think in the next 5 years, you're gonna have the majority of states really giving flexibility away from seat time. So change is happening, and it's happening rapidly in the next 3 to 5 years across K through 12 education around the world, but also in the US, is starting to look very different, and hopefully these conversations will move. National initiatives right now, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium has a task force on competency-based education, so that's encouraging. Achieve has a ADP work group looking at competency education. Race to the Top district had a priority for mastery-based models. NSF is funding an evaluation of a competency-based 8th grade algebra, and it's growing as a policy agenda. Oh, just one last thing on this. We've talked about pretty much all of this, but we haven't talked about the work that the MacArthur Foundation is doing on badging is really interesting because it's fundamentally, if a student can exhibit those skills, they can earn a badge. And there's this whole, I won't go into all of the project, but if you start to think about bridging this competency-based education in K-12 and the potential badging work and how that can come together, you really could start to have a system around the kid of informal and formal learning, which I think is really exciting. But you know, I get excited around a lot of really nerdy things, as you can tell. So to wrap up, we have a number of resources. Everything is free on our website, all of the reports that we have published. And I love this quote. Stephen Heppel, who's based in the UK, he started a movement called Not School. He actually builds schools, but he calls them Not School. And we were at a conference in Ireland talking, and he said these three things that just stuck with me. Students should advance on stage of their learning, not age. So that's a big thing across the EU is stage, not age. Age and time are for adult convenience. And there's no limit, there should be no limit to how fast and how far students can go. And that is true. We should be designing the environments. There should be no limit to how fast and how far our kids can go. So thank you. Thank you for having me be your keynote closing this conference on Saturday afternoon. So thank you.
Q is the education technology in California. What iNACOL is the online learning information. Their conference, the Virtual School Symposium, is a must place to go because it is such an amazing collection of people who once a year come to share and network. The policies that iNACOL is in the middle of day to day help drive this revolution and make it better for all of us. So we are indebted to iNACOL being here. Thank you, Susan, very much.
Thank you.
And I will probably be able to mirror, you're going to do something, aren't you? I mean, work your magic. So I just want to mirror out here. So we can award the prizes. But you can hear me back there, can't you? Oh, you're recording, so you have to do this. Okay. See, when you're a theater arts major, you learn how to project. I'm mirrored. No, I'm not. It's like magic. Bingo. All right. We're indebted, this is us. Thank you, Mike. We're indebted to all of our partners who sponsored this conference and took the risk with us. K-12 for being our premier. Discovery for giving us Hall. Our presenting partners, E2020, In Focus, Caliquity, Thesis. Our sponsors, Accelerate, Apex, Atomic Learning, Connections Learning, Connects, Odyssey-Ware, Voyager. Thank you all, including BYU, SETBA, the CDE, CTAP, the Orange Department of Ed, University of California Online Academy, and you have a new name and I can't remember what it is. You all know it, don't you? And of course, iNACOL. You know us, your source for standards-aligned resources. You know that next year's symposium is right here. Both floors, December 6th and 7th. Save the date. Request for speakers goes out in March, as does the submission of awards for next year. Well, the prizes are right here. And you know that this spring's Q conference, 4,000 people gathering for 3 days in Palm Springs, an amazing event. Mike has given us a free registration to Palm Springs. Kelly, could you bring up the, we'll need a drum roll here. Because you must be present to win. Okay, the winner of a annual Q Conference registration is, somebody crossed someone's name out. Marco Rios. Come on down. Could be. But the grand prize, ladies and gentlemen, are from our friends at InFocus who provided all the projectors for this conference. Amazing devices that had great brightness and throw. We thank our friends at InFocus. Are you here? That's okay, we have your projector. And the winner of an InFocus projector is Christine McCormick. No, this says Brian Bridges. Okay, Christine McCormick. Congratulations, and thank you to InFocus. Yeah, pretty good. We sold out this year, 350 people. Sold out sponsorships. We're aiming for 500 next year. We thank you for coming. We'll be sending out on Monday an evaluation to all of you, asking you to evaluate this entire conference. We'll also ask you at that time to return and evaluate those sessions that you attended that you haven't evaluated already. We want to make next year better based on your data. Thank you for coming.